Today we're exploring a topic that feels more critical than ever: CQ, cultural intelligence. In a world shaped by shifting geopolitical dynamics, global migration, multicultural workplaces, and increasingly diverse teams, the ability to understand and navigate cultural differences is no longer optional. It's actually a leadership capability. CQ, or cultural intelligence, is what allows individuals and organizations to move beyond assumptions, build trust across differences, and work effectively in an interconnected world. And I couldn't think of a better person to explore this topic with than today's guest, Lucy Butters. Lucy is one of only 10 Master Facilitators in cultural intelligence in the world. She's a CQ Fellow and the author of Cultural Intelligence in Practice. Through her company, she works with organizations across sectors from universities and healthcare to banking and engineering, helping leaders and teams strengthening their ability to operate with awareness, adaptability, and inclusion across cultures. Lucy also brings deep experience from her time at the British Council, working in international cultural relations and supporting the global ambition of universities. Alongside all of that, she's also the mother of triplet boys, something she often says is her daily reminder that cultural intelligence starts with the ability to adjust our thinking. Hi Lucy, welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast. I'm so excited to talk to you about the work you do in the cultural intelligence space and your wonderful book.
Thank you, Beanish, and I am very delighted to be here with you. I'm speaking from Glasgow in Scotland. I'm Scottish. I'm a Master Facilitator in Cultural Intelligence. I've had my own training and coaching company since 2010. Before that, I was in the field of soft diplomacy and cultural relations with the British Council. And how I would describe myself is I'm very optimistic on the whole, even although sometimes it can be hard at the moment. And I'm a mum to 3 young men now. That I can't call them boys anymore. They're about to leave their teenage years. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, fantastic. And I know you call that out in your book as well. Love all the stories and all the personal touches you call out in your books. And so if we get right into it then, Lucy, what do we mean by cultural intelligence in practical terms?
In practical terms, cultural intelligence is about interacting well with people, wherever those people have come from or their backgrounds. So it's about relating and getting done what you are hoping to get done in whatever groups you are part of. And it's rooted in theories of intelligence. We'll have heard of IQ and emotional intelligence, and cultural intelligence is rooted in that multifaceted intelligence theory. So it sounds quite abstract, but really it's about how do you and I get on and make things happen when we think about the world from totally different perspectives.
Yeah, I really love that because I know early on at the start of your book, you call out a couple of interactions with your dad and stories that you learnt from your dad. And I'd love for you to share that in a minute. But fundamentally, what I took from that was very much around being open with your thoughts, your words, how you see people around you, even if they are very different to you, even if they are very similar to you, what are the differences? And having that non-judgmental mindset as to what is it that they can bring. And I love the word that you used in there around absorb. What can you absorb from other people's stories? So do you mind sharing a little bit more around your dad as your inspiration and how his influence on you has supported the foundations and the work that you do?
I'm always happy to talk about my dad. I love my dad, and he's not been with us for 7 years, I think. So I'm very happy to have been. Thank you. So my dad was a minister from the Protestant Church of Scotland, in the north east of Scotland. We were in quite a small town, maybe 4,000-ish people, so not huge. And he was a minister, so everybody knew my dad. Wherever I go, I always felt that people knew who I was, even if I didn't know who they were. So there was that element about being at the center, but being different kind of thing. Um, and my dad, he just really always got on well with people and was very open about people, all these different things. And one of the stories I shared was about answering the door. And I was young, I'd have been in primary school, probably pre-10. And it was a man, and all I can really remember is the smell kind of thing. Obviously a homeless man. Um, but at the time I was and I don't know what I said, but he left. And I remember later my dad just being I have a sense of my dad being disappointed in me for not bringing, it was a human, and I have that sense of disappointment. And then earlier when we were talking before we started our recording, Dina, you were saying how much you liked this story when I was going through a bit of a rough patch. And my dad had said to me, "You just have to be philosophical, Lucy." And I've always held on to that. And it's like I can still hear him saying that to me, because philosophical would be my language, because I am not religious. And my dad would have said, trust in God, or, other phrases would have meant more to him. And so I really felt he spoke to me in my language and was accepting me and loving me for who I am, despite I'm quite sure that element would have been disappointing for him. But that bit about the person and loving the person, and my dad always used to say you had to look out with love and respect. And I try and take that with me. I love that.
I love that so much. It's so personal and so beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing that. And that bit around speaking your language, that's so important, because I love how, from a cultural intelligence perspective, it's going deeper beyond the systems, beyond the cultural nuances we know. What does the language look like? The exchange of language between two individuals. What I'm observing from the story is that exchange with your father was really him trying to meet his child, him trying to meet you where you were. He used that moment to gently challenge your thinking and to help you question your own assumptions and reflections more deeply of your own perspective. And he did that in a language that wasn't his natural style, maybe wasn't even his comfort zone, but he knew it was yours. And I love that so much, because that choice has created such a powerful lesson for you that you're still carrying it with you today in the work that you're doing. And so, how is it different from traditional cultural diversity training?
I think when it goes into training, you're looking at, wait, what I love about it is it's about your capabilities. And all of us can enhance our capabilities. There's not a bit where you're a kind of person who can't become more culturally intelligent. So it's about enhancing our capabilities and doing so that we can improve. You said about diversity in training or intercultural competency. So it's related with these things, but it's like the power skill that sits behind it. The woman, Professor Sunang, who looked and developed cultural intelligence, or realized what cultural intelligence was, she looked at intercultural competency models and found there were over 200 of them in the world. So it's kind of like, what are you looking for? Personality, attitude, capabilities. Cultural intelligence is very clear. What are your capabilities? And that's really important, because a bit like you talking about the language and the words, DEI inclusion, we need the behaviors, we need the ability to make people feel that they can thrive in whatever organization that we're with, or with the coaches that we're with. Some of your audience will be coaches and trainers. So how do we engage people? And that's really what cultural intelligence is all about. and it doesn't change. You layer in. You can't become can't become culturally intelligent in, a training session. It's about habit and building habit, and good training programs and coaching programs will keep people reflective and building on that capability.
Yeah, I think that's such a valid point. I know in your book you call out that cultural intelligence is not an end point, it's not an end goal. It goes beyond intuition. It's around those layers that you spoke about. And you base a lot of your framework around the four capabilities of cultural intelligence: drive, knowledge, strategy, action. Could you tell us a little bit more around what are those pillars within the framework and what does that look like?
Great. Yeah. So it's what I mentioned, Professor Sunang, she had been involved in some way. If any of the people listening remember the millennium bug, where we thought that when the year hit 2000, all the computer systems, it would all implode. And she had been involved in some way in the 1990s with that. And what fascinated her was that the people who were best in their field, in their regions, came together, and together they were frequently not very effective. Had an agreement been made? Whose role was it to do what? All this bits of missing information or misunderstood information. And I'm sure anyone who's worked where there's diversity will be familiar with that sensation that people understand differently. And that got her fascinated in subject. And she found that those four capabilities were consistently high with individuals and with organizations that work well with diversity. So the first one about the drive, what's your motivation to even want to be effective working with diversity? If we don't have the drive there, what are our chances? And I find it interesting that that's something that can be built, because I think people often think of motivation as just something you have or you don't, but actually we can increase it. And confidence is a big part here as well. Just even that confidence to start a conversation, to have these conversations. Knowledge, how do we know about how cultures are similar? And I would also say self-knowledge. You're always taking yourself into any situation. When do you react? When do you feel a rub? When do you maybe switch off a little and stop paying attention? All these different things. Strategy, a lot of training focuses on knowledge, do's and taboos and things like that. Strategy is you're thinking about thinking, reflecting, planning, being aware. Am I aware of being issues listening at the moment? How would I check that? How would I look into it? These different things. So it's a really important element of not just thinking I've got the knowledge, because that can lead to stereotyping. If we think, well, I've got the knowledge, I'm fine. And then action, which is in the book, I found it really interesting. I asked all the interviewees which of the capabilities they maybe found hardest to maintain or keep up, and half it was the action piece, the doing things differently. And I think when things are uncomfortable, we can sometimes go into fight, flight, maybe freeze mode. So that bit about knowing that we're going to feel uncomfortable, we're going to feel ambiguity, and that's okay. How do we travel through that?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And as you were speaking, it reminded me that when I was reading your book, I really saw cultural intelligence as that additional cog that feeds onto your DEIB knowledge that you might have, the coaching experience, and particularly around emotional intelligence, because it goes that little bit deeper than emotional intelligence, but you still need to have that greater understanding of reading the person in front of you, understanding what systems or what cultural nuances might be coming up before we go into that critical state of judgment or jumping to conclusions. And in your view, then, in the work that you've been doing, what problems do you think cultural intelligence is solving within organizations?
I often hear the word problems and gap. I'm aware that I respond to opportunity and growth. So I kind of think, it's an opportunity. However, that bit about the problem is often when there has been issues, when there's maybe teams aren't working as effectively or efficiently or productively as they thought. Things around leadership development. Leaders are often promoted into roles or sent overseas, and they're not given much development as to what will be required of them, how they might need to develop their skills. So the bit about trust, breakdown, customer complaints, that kind of thing. So it's always about the people. It's about people. Cultural intelligence is about people and doing that well. And sometimes I'm working with organizations. I was doing a leadership development program with an oil and gas company, and it was just we were maybe doing an hour and a half to 2 hour sessions, a number of them with reflections in between. And I remember one of the guys at the start of one of the things, he just started the change of instead of at the end of the week meeting, he'd be like, okay, do we all understand what we're doing? Off we go. He started making that slower and trying to do a kind of what does everybody understand what he should be doing, and discovering that, of course, in this very international team, people understood very differently. And he said immediately it reduced how much firefighting he had to do in 2 days' time. Because he said he had always been in that kind of situation of thinking, why on earth are they doing what they've just done when we agreed on whatever day of the week these are their team meetings, that this is. And so spending more time in the team meeting to clarify understanding saved him time and saved firefighting, as he called it. It's so there that bit about understanding that people absorb differently, and the more diverse team, the more that's going to happen. Just that was a real safe change, and I think he'd been quite skeptical about the training, so it was a really interesting thing to see, to him saying, "Oh, this is totally improved."
I really like that example. It reminds me of when you call out the metaphor of the umbrella in your book, and how you talk about how the cultural intelligence is one part of that umbrella. And without that part, the umbrella wouldn't work. It links back to what you were saying about the motivation and the framing of your training, the framing of your meetings. Why it's so important is because actually, what is it that you really want to get out of cultural intelligence so that you can be a bit more intentional about how you apply it, whether it's to a training program or to a meeting. And particularly in those global teams, whether it's done virtual or in person, in that example that you shared was something around demystifying what people are taking when we use language, when we use common words that can mean something very different to different people. And that in the moment reflection or in the moment action planning around what have we all comprehended? Let's circle back. Have we all understood the same thing of what we've just been discussing? Sounds actually so basic and a very practical tip to do. But why, in your view, do organizations struggle to do it?
I'm going to say things that are simple often aren't easy, and it's to do with habit. I'm also, if it's okay, I'm just going to look back. You were talking about that metaphor about the umbrella and CQ being one of the spokes for DEI. And I'm just going to say that was a metaphor from Dr. Sandra Upton, who was one of the fabulous people that I interviewed for the book. So there's lots of lovely insights like that. And I want to make sure I mention her name. She'll be delighted that you picked that. pick that out as the metaphor. Coming back into the simple but not easy and habits. And a lot of things, one of the things I recommend throughout the book is that bit about pausing, taking a deep breath. It's a really slow thing. However, it stops us just reacting and maybe being more measured in our interaction. And it's a habit. You've got to get into the habit. And so it's establishing the habits that often become difficult, particularly maybe sometimes we're in contexts where speed is valued. Often I'm working with people who discover it's about where you spend time, though. I think if you spend time up front, sometimes people feel that's a waste of time, but it often saves time later on. So I try and get people in coaching or training to think about, what are the impacts of not spending time here? Are you seeing the downsides of that later on? And so that you can, particularly people who are very doing orientated, I think they sometimes thinking about things in these blocks can be useful.
So, what I'm taking from that is really the importance of simply pausing, creating a thinking space, a thinking environment before we start jumping into doing with ourselves, with our teams. When you frame that space, I guess, up front, it's really helping people connect around that shared purpose, around shared values. And that's the bit that often gets missed. So, in particularly those high pressure environments, creating pause, creating those thinking environments, don't go straight into action mode. And that's the real value in stepping back in that moment, letting people think, explore ideas, and communicate their own perspectives so that everyone is aligned on how we are moving forward. So that really gets me thinking then, Lucy, about cultural intelligence today. In your view, then, with the rise of third culture kids, globalization, increasing diverse teams, expat communities around the world, is cultural intelligence becoming more complex? Or are you actually finding that there's a huge opportunity at the moment for people to expand their emotional intelligence and understanding of the world through a deeper understanding of layered culture?
I think cultural intelligence stays the same. That is the capabilities and context change. And you mentioned things there like more third country kids, all these and people are on the move more. For me, that means there's more opportunity. The context keeps changing. We're always going to need cultural intelligence. I'm not convinced it was ever that simple because I think there's always been generation and gender and these different elements that sometimes people have railed against, at all different points in history. And I think sometimes we look at things as being simple and they've maybe not been that simple for everyone in that mix. So the context always changes. And I think it represents necessity, not just opportunity, but necessity to think about it and to think about how we interact. I think at the moment there's a lot of tension. I think with everything, there's a time and a place for everything. I think where there's real, where you have a total breakdown in peace and there's a war situation, that's a different situation. It's kind of, so you've got to know your context and these different elements that are going on as well. And I think peace is kind of foundational for us being able to practice cultural intelligence or anything. Um, so yeah, I see that there's lots of possibility and opportunity and necessity. Really would be some of the things in the world today. Sometimes when I've been training, I remember at the end, sometimes I remember somebody going and go, "Oh, we'd have world peace if we were all culturally intelligent." And I'm like, "No, we wouldn't. No, we wouldn't, because cultural intelligence is just this one element. And actually, it needs to be mixed with other things around values and different systems and in order for there to be world peace. It's not just cultural intelligence on its own. It's but like you just said, Beanish, about it's not an end in and of itself. It's got to link in with other things.
Yeah, yeah, it's about that human first concept, even if you don't like them. And I think I wrote it down here where you wrote, everybody communicates, but few connects. I really love that. And I think it was another quote you quoted in your book. But it's a really great way to think about it. It's that I'm communicating, but how do I connect? I don't have to like you, but I might need to connect with you, particularly in a work environment to get things done, or even outside work, you might just need to find ways of connecting. And that's where that cultural intelligence can really support with having that intention to want to connect. And a lot of what you're saying is around changing our language around the how. What else would you say, particularly around language, to support that building the capability of cultural intelligence within our emotional intelligence and the work we do?
In the book, there's a chapter on questioning and listening. And for me, it's really fundamental. Listening, I view as culturally determined. Who do we listen to? How long do we have to listen to someone? What voices carry weight with us? All these different things. And you realize that often listening has been shaped by the environments that we've been part of. Also, good questions that enable people to see possibility or to open up with their own words are so important. I once was involved with the British Council with a leadership development program that was over 12 days, and about 6 of those days, over a year, and of 6 of those days, we kind of focused on questions and different types of questions. And that really enables you to inspire and help develop others. So for coaches, for coaches, it's the only tool you have really is questions, and lots of people don't have that. I hear a lot. I'm often working with leaders who talk about empowering people. You can't empower people without questions. And often the same leaders feel that they have to solve everything. And so there's a bit around that habit again, the habit of going in, this is what I do in leadership, really busy. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just going in to do. So there's something about standing back, good questions, keep noticing and absorbing and trying out different styles of questions. Absolutely.
That's my favorite. I love anything to do with listening. I find it the most important skill for anyone to have. And that's the part where people struggle with the most because they always feel they don't have time to listen. It's too much effort, it's too much work, it takes too long. They have so many pressing deadlines, they've got a strategy they need to achieve. And that's when I think cultural intelligence, in my view, can really support, because listening can just be in the moment, can be away from looking at a screen, not touching your phone, not writing something down, and just really using your body language, using those nonverbal skills to pay attention and activate that deeper listening. What are they telling me? But what am I really hearing? I know what I'm hearing, but what do they potentially mean? And that's that connection bit that you speak about in your book. So AI, you say, can't replace cultural intelligence, but it's so talked about at the moment. It's so important. So everybody's going to want to know, what is the AI impact on cultural intelligence, and how can practitioners, trainers, L&D functions use AI to support them when it comes to cultural intelligence?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I did the interviews in 2023 and then wrote, and it took me about 40 months to do the writing. And so in 2023, AI was there, but nobody was really speaking about it. But by 2024, it was everywhere, and it was in every session that I do, I would get asked a question on it. It's really interesting. And fortunately, Dr. Laila Koestani, she agreed to do a guest chapter on AI and CQ training. And there are different ways. I was talking with somebody who uses virtual reality in their DEI training, for example, and I thought, wow, amazing. So AI covers so many different things. And one of the main things I would say is that you have to be culturally intelligent, both to give it useful prompts if you're using generative AI for anything, to be getting useful prompts, and also to be recognizing if what you're being told is valid in the various different contexts that you might go into. One of the things with AI is that it always sounds confident. Even when you prompt it and it goes, "Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. What I meant to say was," even then, it always sounds confident. And so I think as a user, think about your prompts, think about who you're wanting things for, and that's really important if you're using it in that way. And in terms of looking at things like data, it can do things so quickly for picking up patterns if you're working with groups and have data in that kind of way. In terms of your preparation, could be useful that way. In terms of coaching, you're hearing more and more that people are just using an AI bot. And I think there'll always be some people that would just always prefer a person to an AI bot. But I think we're in a watch this space, Beanish. I'm not very sure what the future will be possible, but I think absolutely bring your cultural intelligence to your interactions with AI, knowing that it's not actually a human.
That's fantastic. I mean, a couple of golden nuggets there for me directly. So something around thinking about that creativity when it comes to maybe training and planning sessions. How can you help land cultural intelligent messages better through being using tools like virtual reality or other AI tools that might be able out there to support you. Then I heard something around prompting deeper to better understand trends and maybe a bit of return on investment around CQ for organizations or for practitioners looking to focus on any cultural intelligence return as well. So thank you so much. And if there's one key takeaway you'd like to give the audience to start thinking about and implementing CQ, what would that be?
One key takeaway would be to be intentional